I'm Nathan Ponchard, this is Chasing Cars, and this is the 2021 Mazda 3 GT sedan. Now, we drove a Mazda 3 Estina hatch recently, and that is quite similar to this car because mechanically they are the same thing, this being the G25 version as that was. But they're actually quite different cars. Mazda's logic behind having the sedan and the hatch being almost completely different styling-wise was that they could make this range more elegant as a sedan, sportier as a hatchback, because they had the CX-30 to fill the gap for where people want an SUV, which turns out is a lot of people these days. Now, stylistically, the sedan only shares the windscreen and the front door glass with the hatch, although I suspect that it also shares the headlights and the grille shape, but that's pretty much it. Every single panel is different, and the entire front bumper bar is different, and it gives it a greater elegance. In fact, the 3 sedan is so big now that it is actually almost exactly the same size as the original Mazda 6 sedan from 2002. This is only 10 millimeters shorter than a Mazda 6 sedan, but rides on a 50 millimeter longer wheelbase than the original 6 and is 15 millimeters wider. So yeah, pretty much the same. It's also 200 millimeters longer than the hatch. And as we see when we get around the back of the car, that really gives benefits when it comes to boot space. Now at the front here, I suppose one thing I should point out is that even though this is the GT, which is the second top model below the Estina, and then there's also the Skyactiv X Estina, has halogen lights for its daytime running lights. You can leave the headlights on all the time and they'll switch off when you turn the car on and off, like Subarus have pretty much always done and Mazdas haven't. But I think it's kind of the one thing stylistically for me that lets the car down. Let me know what you think in the comments below, because you just have this sort of yellowy glow that's like a base Polo or something. This car is sexy enough to deserve more than that. Now, besides having less of a chin in its lower front bumper area, one of the main styling differences between the sedan and the hatch is this crease line that starts in the front mudguard here, runs through the front door, and then peters out somewhere in the back door, whereas the hatch is completely smooth, running into that really smooth back end that is more about style than aerodynamics, as we shall discover. Wheelbases are exactly the same, 27, 25 millimeters, and at the back here, the sedan has this extra 200 mil here, which is all in the boot. And I think one of the things that I like about it the most is the way that Mazda has done the back end of this car. It is really elegant. It looks really classy. This is not a tacked on boot lid on another vehicle. It is like the original Mazda 3 was, where the hatch and the sedan were quite different from each other. Although I think this time it's even more so. When we come around to the boot here, here's the biggest difference. It's in this capacity. It's 444 litres, which is only 50 millimeters less than what a Commodore was. It doesn't have an electric tailgate like the top spec hatch does. It just has a handle, but at least it has a handle, which is great. And the floor is dead flat. It runs all the way through to the 60/40 split backrests, which fold almost flat as well. Now, because it has a fixed parcel shelf, it also puts its subwoofer for the Bose stereo up in the top here with this big speaker grille and not in the space saver spare underneath, which leaves a little bit of extra room for wet towels and swimmers and stuff like that, which is a good thing. But inside, as we'll discover, it's almost the same, at least in the front seat. While the elegance of the Mazda 3 has taken a big step up on the outside, it has definitely been reflected on the inside as well. Now, Mazda has a bit of a history of doing really good interiors in this small car class, and the only model that I can think of since the original 323 in 1976 that wasn't the best interior in its class was the last 323, which was Mazda's kind of bankruptcy car before the first Mazda 3. All of them have been good, but none of them have been as good as this at the beginning of its life. And I suspect that this car is going to be a standard setter for its entire life because it really is premium level of quality. I love the way that it has this sunken area for the, I nearly said touchscreen, and it's not, for the screen, which will inevitably become a touchscreen, and I would say move closer to the driver like it has in the CX-30 screen that's gone into the CX-9 and the Mazda 6, and it's only a matter of time before it makes it into this car. But anyway, This padded section along here with the stitching is beautiful. Even the top along here is nice and squidgy. I love the way that it flows into the doors here. There's a lot of different layers, but they just blend beautifully. The exposed stitching in the door, the lovely Remington steel shaver, speaker grills for the Bose stereo in this GT model, floating armrests, you name it, there's quality everywhere. The steering wheel as well is superb. I love the way it's kind of dish with this little exposed boss in the middle, and it's beautiful to hold with a lovely set of analog dials sitting in front of you. Although the speedo is actually digital, it's a digital analog, which only has 3 different screens in it, which is kind of a waste of space really, but it still looks really good. However, the buttons on the steering wheel, which are nice and chromy and look high-end, are really difficult to see in certain light. In fact, where I'm sitting from right here, I can only read one of the buttons that runs all the way along the bottom, and that's limit. You kind of need to know what they are to know where to press, and sometimes you've got to move around to see them. I think inevitably that's only a matter of time before that gets changed. The other thing too is the HVAC in the center here, which looks slick and is great, has the seat heaters in here, a steering wheel heater over here. The buttons that run along the top that match what's in the screen here aren't marked, and it does take a while to remember that that's what the buttons do for that. So you kind of don't instinctively go for what should be doing the control. But anyway, in the center here we have the rotary controller for the Mazda screen, not touch screen. That works pretty well, but it is kind of frustrating scrolling through things on Apple CarPlay or Android Auto to get them to work, and all of that's superior to the standard stuff that the car comes with. Seeing that Audi has now bidden their controller, and that's clearly what this was originally copying, then I think it's only a matter of time that it happens in this car. We have a USB port here for the Bose stereo. We also have another one in here, so you can hide your phone away rather than having it hang around everywhere, because it is a wired system. We have a 12-volt outlet here, and in this little tray here, it has a little carpeted flexi mat thing in the bottom, but also have these little dividers where you can move them to the back to have it all deep, or you can put it in the middle and divide it into 2. And the armrest, which is really nicely padded, slides forward or back depending on whether you need to access stuff or not, which I think is really cool. Also have a pair of cup holders here. You can fit a 1 litre bottle in the door, but that's probably about it. You might be able to squeeze a 1.25 in, but not a 1.5. And we also have a little pocket over here, another little attention to detail from Mazda that would be for, I don't know, credit cards, chewing gum. The one thing that the GT doesn't get from the Estina is a sunroof, but I really don't think that that's any great big deal. It also doesn't get the option of having white leather, although why you would want to have white leather in a car is a little bit beyond myself, although you may think otherwise. The biggest difference between the Mazda 3 hatch and the sedan is this window line. In the sedan, it's much lower and more expansive, and you have this great view from the side of you here, which you don't necessarily have in the hatch, which is sort of kind of trying to be a coupe hatch. In here, it's much more traditional, and yet it's not traditionally Mazda 3 because there's actually room in here. This back seat is set much higher than it used to be. It used to sit really low in the back of a Mazda 3 and stare at the headrest. And now where I am at 5'10", I'm looking just over the top of the headrest. I feel like the seat's nicely elevated. I still have my toes touching the seat in front of me because this seat is as low as it will go, but it's not an uncomfortable position. I can still move my feet around. There's actually a reasonable amount of leg room, and the seat is really quite supportive. I find that I could drive several hours in the back here, although I wouldn't be driving, I'd be the passenger, and do it completely comfortably. The armrests also have a full proper grab handle here where you can grab onto the doors, which they also have in the front passenger seat, but not in the driver's because it has all the window controls there. You can just fit this 1 litre camping bottle in the door here with another little tray in front of it there. We've only got one map pocket. We do have air vents, although no fancy controls, just simple air vents, no USB ports. We do have an armrest here with another 2 cup holders in it, which is nicely aligned with the one in the door. The overall effect of it is that you're sitting in what is essentially almost a medium-sized car. This is not small car levels of legroom and vision and space, and certainly not Mazda 3 levels of historic vision and space because it didn't really have very much. Still more than 30% of buyers buy the sedan, which was what makes this car still relatively important. I think the split in Australia was 35% sedan in 2020, 32% so far in 2021, and that's still a substantial amount, even though Mazda 3 sales have reduced because of the CX-30, but they're different cars. Anyway, this is about the driving, and I think the thing about the Mazda 3 is the harder that you drive it, the better it gets. So let's get back in there. Ever since Mazda went front-wheel drive in 1980, their small cars have been really good to drive to varying degrees. And regardless of whether they've looked a bit daggy on the outside, behind the steering wheel, they've been good. One of the criticisms of this generation Mazda 3, though, the fourth generation that launched in 2019, was that it went to a torsion beam rear end rather than having the multi-link independent rear suspension that it had earlier. But I think that is sort of almost like box ticking, really, because the reality of it is that the Mazda 3 drives really well. Would you believe that Mazda used the Peugeot 308 as the benchmark for torsion beam dynamics in a small hatchback? And for good reason, because the Peugeot is good to drive, but so is this too. And they do share several things, including their poise in corners and their eagerness to be driven hard. Now, this GT sedan is wearing 18-inch alloy wheels with 215/45/18 Toyo tyres, and they do tend to transmit quite a lot of what's going on the road, although not with very much tyre noise, which is a huge relief in a Mazda. They tend to patter around over sort of lighter bumps and potholes, and the Mazda 3 kind of lolls around a bit on certain bumps and stuff, so it isn't quite the serene and fluid driving experience that many people may want in a car. Certainly one that looks as elegant as this Mazda 3 sedan. And I keep saying that word elegant, that's because it is. The dynamics of this car, though, is not elegant, it's sporty. The more you drive the Mazda 3 and the harder that you drive it, the better that it gets. From the precision of its steering in a corner to the nuance of its handling balance and the way it moves around in the back end and uses its tail to help it point into a corner. It really is a delightful thing. And again, same with its ride. The more that you ask of it, the better it gets, because there's this underlying suppleness in there that means you can absolutely hammer this car over road undulations and not have it lose its composure. Engine-wise, we're pretty much as par any top spec Mazda 3 or Mazda 6 up until the most recent generation, which is the 2.5 Skyactiv G petrol engine with 139 kilowatts at 6,000 RPM and 252 Newton meters at 4,000 RPM. Now, I haven't performance tested this latest generation Mazda 3, but the previous generation car would do 7.6, 7.7 to 100, manual or automatic. No worse than about an 8. And I would guess this car would be somewhere around the same, 7.5 to 100, which is not hanging about. The one thing that has changed in this drivetrain in the latest Mazdas is that they are now tuned to not have the 6-speed automatic constantly go into the highest gear possible, which is really frustrating. It can now use torque better than it could before, but it also is more amenable to where your throttle position is, meaning you don't have to constantly switch it into sport, which is also still, unfortunately, this annoying little toggle down here, which is okay, I suppose, but common sense says copy BMW and put the sport mode where manual is, because they've certainly copied BMW with the plus-minus shift, meaning when you want to change down, you push forward, and when you want to change back, you push up. You also have steering wheel paddles, meaning you don't necessarily need to use that, but that movement is much more intuitive than playing around down there. Otherwise, this car is intuitive on the whole. The driving position in the GT is the one thing that you would choose this over the Evolve below it, because it does have full electric adjustment with adjustable lumbar support, and it means you can find a perfect driving position. That's not something that you can do in Mazda's manual seats. That said, the front passenger does have manual height adjustment, which is again something that was completely mutually exclusive to virtually any Mazda model until the last few years, and finally they have that feature here. You do get a super clear head-up display, which is something that the GT shares with the Estina, but other than that, I don't think you need many of the Astina's equipment extras, perhaps other than the adaptive headlighting, which does make it look better. Why, though, the GT doesn't get the front cross traffic alert and the rear AEB of the Astina is beyond me. You have to get a $1,500 vision technology package to get those features. You also get a 360-degree surround camera with that, but you also get another thing that's called cruising and traffic support, which I find really frustrating. It isn't in this car, and thank God for that, because, for example, if you're at a set of traffic lights and you're trying to follow someone very closely to make it through like a turning signal or something like that, that actual technology tries to keep you away from the car in front and will actually hit the brakes to make you not drive up the arse of the person that's in front of you, which, when it happens, you hope the person behind you isn't doing the same thing. I feel like that's a case of a car trying to be too smart for its own good. Stick to the GT, ignore the Astina. Now to the real world performance of the engine. There's a zinginess to it and it enjoys being revved out. It'll rev to 6.5, 6,600 RPM depending on what gear you're in, and enjoy doing so. But it's a really efficient engine that doesn't need to have its neck wrung, even though it likes doing it. This GT sedan has a combined fuel consumption of 6.5 litres per 100, which is actually 0.1 better than the hatch, even though the hatch is 8 kilograms lighter. Now that's because the sedan has a boot lid at the back to direct the air off the back of the car, and even though Mazda doesn't claim a drag coefficient number, guaranteed the sedans is better than the hatchbacks. The other thing is that it really isn't that much less economical than the 2-litre. In fact, the manual 2.5 is more economical than the manual 2-litre simply because it has the torque to be able to pull its 6 gears. The automatic is really close though, so it's neither here nor there. I think that you should stretch to the 2.5 over the 2-litre, but that said, even the 2-litre in this current generation Mazda 3 tries really hard at channeling its torque. The automatic does a pretty good job of driving efficiently while still having performance easily at the axis, and that's surely all that anyone can ask out of a naturally aspirated engine. You don't need to wring the neck of these engines to get the best out of them, but when you do, there is an oral and performance reward. What all that achieves in the Mazda 3, from its quality of its steering to its handling, its ride, its noise improvements, particularly its road noise improvement, which is really quite good now, from the quality of its seating to the quality of its interior to the way that it looks, there is a feeling of expense about the Mazda 3 that isn't reflected in the steepness of its price, and that's one of the best things about the car. Even the Bose stereo in this car fits that mold. It's another reason to choose the GT over the Evolve below it, and with 12 speakers, including a subwoofer, it has a really strong level of sound and a really nice clarity to it, as well as decent bass. And having a great stereo shouldn't be only left up for people paying lots of money for a car. I think that's something that should be egalitarian, that everybody deserves, and that's something that the Mazda 3 again brings to the table. One of the best things about the Mazda 3 GT sedan though is its price. It's $35,290 for this 6-speed automatic, which is $1,000 more than the 6-speed manual, which unusually for almost everything these days is available in almost every spec in the Mazda 3, and Mazda deserves praise for that. Personally, I would buy the manual. Let us know what you think in the comments below, but this automatic doesn't leave you shortchanged. It is still a really good car to drive and is a really efficient car to drive. It is also a car that has its own level of presence. It is not trying to be sporty like the hatch, even though it still has the sportiness in its driving experience. I also feel like you're getting better value compared to a Mazda 6 sedan because they share essentially the same engine, but I think the Mazda 3 looks much more handsome, it has much more usable boot space, it has better rear seat headroom, and it's a more modern car. So good on the sedan. It has its own level of class and quality that makes it almost a premium sedan for somewhere in the mid to high 30s, drive away. Like, that's amazing. If you haven't subscribed, please do so below the video, hit the notification bell and leave a comment on what you think on the Mazda 3 GT sedan or the hatch, or the difference between the two, or on chasing cars. Thanks for watching.